A caged bird doesn't sing for joy. It sings to remind the jailer that it's still alive. Welcome back, Chosen One. You weren't born to blend in. You were born to break the blueprint. The very people who smiled in your face were sharpening knives behind your back. They didn't raise you. They trained you to stay silent, to stay small, to stay under their control. But the cage is cracking now, and they can feel it. That panic you sense, that's not yours, that's theirs. They're not fighting you, they're wrestling with the universe. And guess what? The universe doesn't lose. Every time they gaslighted you, tried to dim your light, tried to call you crazy for questioning their lies. They weren't silencing a person, they were challenging cosmic order. They thought they could lock up lightning in a jar. But lightning doesn't stay still, and neither do you. Before we dive deeper, take 1 second and like and subscribe. When you do that, you're not just helping this message get seen. You're sending a flare out into the dark, a signal to other chosen ones who are waking up right now. You help the algorithm notice. You help the movement grow. You're doing more than you know. Let's get into it. Being chosen doesn't mean you were treated better. It often means you were targeted more. They saw your light before you knew it was even shining. The moment you started asking questions, the moment you refused to play along, you became a threat. They tried to convince you that you were the problem, but deep down, they always knew the truth. If you ever got free, the whole illusion would collapse. So they caged you with shame, guilt, and fake loyalty. They used bloodlines as chains, birthdays as bargaining chips, and childhood memories as manipulation. But we're family, they said, while digging into your spirit with smiling faces. What they really meant was, stay where we put you, but not anymore. Your mind started waking up. Your spirit started shaking the bars. And the moment you started slipping through their fingers, they panicked. Why? Because you were never meant to escape. They didn't just want control, they needed it. Your freedom proves their game was rigged. Your healing exposes their sickness. And here's the thing that haunts them the most. You didn't just survive, you transformed. They tried to bury you in silence, but now your voice echoes. They tried to clip your wings, but you're mid-flight. You're becoming exactly what they feared, a reflection of everything they tried to destroy and couldn't. You are not alone. The universe doesn't forget its own. It whispers through every breakdown, moves through every betrayal, and stands behind every truth you dared to speak. You thought you were losing everything, but really, you were shedding their poison. That's not loneliness, that's clarity. And let me be clear, stop doubting your light. Stop assuming you're broken just because they couldn't love you properly. You're not too much. You were just surrounded by people who were too small. You weren't meant to fit in. You were meant to stand out. That's why they hated you quietly, envied you loudly, and feared what you might become. So let them panic. Let them twist. You're not running from them. You're rising beyond them. You didn't escape a cage. You outgrew it. And now, you're becoming the storm they prayed you'd never survive. So, if you've made it this far, that means you feel it. The pressure, the shift, the breaking of the cage. This isn't just a video. This is a mirror held up to everything they tried to keep you from seeing. Drop the number 77 in the comments if you're done playing the role they wrote for you. If you're ready to reclaim your power and let their panic be the proof that your escape is real, then stay. Don't just watch. Feel this. And now, let's break it down step by step. If you're truly one of the chosen, you won't be able to look away. Let's begin. Number 1. They tried to bury the threat, but you were a seed with a storm inside. They didn't fear your rebellion. They feared your awakening, because once you see the cage, you start breaking the whole damn system. Let's make something very clear. The reason they targeted you wasn't because you were weak. It wasn't because you were flawed, broken, or too sensitive. They zeroed in on you because you carried a current they couldn't control. You were wired differently. You were chosen, and deep down, they felt it before you ever did. Your light was never the problem. It was the trigger. The alarm that sounded every time you entered a room with your questions, your clarity, your quiet refusal to play their game. They didn't try to help you. They tried to contain you. Your Shady family wasn't worried about your well-being. They were worried about what would happen when you woke up and realized who you truly were. You weren't just the odd one out. You were the mirror they couldn't look into without choking on their own reflection. And here's the brutal truth. They didn't just underestimate you. They overplayed their hand. The cage they built for you wasn't made of steel. It was made of illusions, guilt, and false loyalty. But you're seeing through it now. The smoke is clearing. You're remembering. You ever wonder why they called you too much? Why they mocked your intuition, laughed at your silence, pushed your buttons just to see you explode? That wasn't random. That was strategy. Because when someone can't destroy your gift, they'll try to destroy your belief in it. They couldn't kill your light, so they tried to convince you it wasn't real. But listen closely. They were never fighting you. They were fighting the force behind you. They thought they were locking up one person, but they were challenging the very current of the universe, the system that selects the chosen and backs them in ways logic can't explain. They tried to choke the roots, not knowing you were connected to something deeper, something divine in motion, even if we don't call it divine. The universe moves for its chosen ones. It shifts timelines. It breaks patterns. It removes everything and everyone not meant to go with you. That's why your isolation was brutal. It wasn't punishment. It was precision, a sacred detachment. The system was pulling you back to launch you forward, and every loss you cried over was really a release from poison. And now that you're rising, now that the fog is lifting, they're panicking, because they always knew that if the cage cracked open, it wouldn't just set you free, it would collapse the lies they lived in. That's why they kept you close, but controlled. That's why they weaponized tradition, culture, and fake affection. You weren't part of the family. You were the glitch in their matrix, and you always were. Still doubting, still wondering if this is really you? Let's be real. If you weren't chosen, you wouldn't have survived what they put you through. The breakdowns, the betrayals, the inner war between knowing something was wrong and being told you were crazy for seeing it. Most wouldn't have made it. But you did. You're still here, still standing. That's not an accident. That's power. Stop treating your survival like luck. Stop labeling your clarity as paranoia. And stop apologizing for being different. You were never meant to be like them. You were designed to disrupt the mold, not fit into it. That's why you felt heavy in rooms that lacked truth. That's why they said you were too deep, too serious, too intense. No, you were too real for a house built on lies. And here's what keeps them up at night. Now that you're breaking free, you're not just healing. You're becoming dangerous to their entire narrative. You're the one who remembers, the one who questions, the one who leaves and doesn't come back playing the same part. They buried a chosen one thinking you'd stay down. But they didn't realize the universe doesn't bury its warriors. It plants them, so grow. break the soil, tear through the silence, because you weren't just locked in a cage, you outgrew it. And now, you're the walking proof that everything they feared is happening right in front of them. Let them panic, let them run, because this time, you're not the one trapped. They are. Number 2. They built an invisible cage, but you were born to walk through walls. They didn't chain your body, they hijacked your mind. That's how cowards operate, not with force, but with infection. Let's rip the mask off this lie once and for all. The cage they locked you in, it wasn't made of concrete or steel. It didn't need to be. It was built with sighs, with eye rolls, with "you're too sensitive," and "don't be dramatic." It was forged in the fires of subtle control, quiet manipulation dressed up as love, sabotage disguised as concern, and criticism hidden behind fake smiles and family dinners. They didn't imprison your limbs, they imprisoned your beliefs about yourself, about your worth, about what you were allowed to want and who you were allowed to be. Every time you dreamed big, they laughed small. Every time you spoke truth, they labeled it disrespect. Every time your soul said no, they said, "You're being difficult." That wasn't discipline, that wasn't parenting, that wasn't protection, that was programming. They trained you like a pet, not raised you like a person. They gave you just enough attention to keep you close, but never enough to let you bloom. They didn't need a cage with bars, they made you build the walls yourself. And then they stood there, smiling, as you paced your own prison, wondering why your wings didn't work. They made your independence a threat. Your questions became crimes. Your silence became a battlefield. When you tried to grow, they called you disloyal. When you tried to leave, they called you ungrateful. What they really meant was, "How dare you not stay broken for our comfort?" That's the part they'll never say out loud. You see, it was never about protecting you. It was always about protecting their lies, their dysfunction, their fragile little egos. You walking in truth was a threat to everything false they had built. You being real made their fake world shatter. You were the living evidence that something was deeply wrong with them, and they couldn't let that truth breathe. So they conditioned you. They handed you guilt like it was your inheritance. They gave you fear instead of freedom. They carved their shame into your back and called it family values. They didn't have to beat you into silence. They just had to train you to doubt yourself so deeply that you would never even try to scream. The abuse was clean, polished, and polite. The kind of psychological warfare you can't prove in court, but you feel in your bones. That's how evil operates when it wears a friendly face. Still wondering why you stayed so long. Still beating yourself up for not seeing it sooner. Don't. That was the point. That's the brilliance of the cage. It was invisible. They didn't trap your body. They got inside your mind and whispered lies until you repeated them as your own. This is normal. This is just how families are. Maybe I really am the problem. But here's what they didn't count on. Your spirit was built from a material they couldn't manipulate. No matter how many years they spent poisoning the soil, the seed still sprouted. That ache inside you. The one that told you this wasn't love, this wasn't truth, this wasn't it. That was the universe tapping on the walls of your cage, waiting for you to listen. And now you're not just listening, you're moving, and they feel it. That's why they're scrambling. That's why the same people who told you you're too much are now saying, "You've changed." Damn right you've changed. You stopped shrinking for their comfort. You stopped mistaking their chains for hugs. You stopped letting their emotional blackmail define your reality. You're not broken. You were brilliantly built, by design, not by accident. And that brilliance is starting to burn through the fog they wrapped you in. You were never hard to love. You were just surrounded by people incapable of loving someone they couldn't control. That's not on you. That's on them. You want to know the real reason they panicked when you started waking up? It's because they knew. Once your eyes opened, you'd never unsee it. And once one chosen one escapes, the whole system starts to shake. You're not just healing for yourself. You're rewriting the code they've used for generations to keep others trapped. And don't forget this. The universe chose you because it knew you had the strength to face this head-on, to break patterns, to walk out without needing revenge. Because your freedom is the revenge. Your peace is the echo of justice they'll never outrun. The moment you stop reacting to their games, their power collapses like a house of cards. And if you're doubting that now, stop. You are not too late. You are not crazy. You are not alone. You are the living proof that energy never lies. You saw the cracks before the walls fell. You felt the darkness even when the lights were on. You heard the silence between their words and still had the courage to trust your gut. You weren't paranoid. You were right. And now that you're free, let that fuel you. Let the fact that they spent so much time, effort, and energy trying to suppress you tell you exactly how powerful you are. They don't fight what they don't fear. They tried to kill what they couldn't control, and that means your very existence is a disruption to their illusion. So walk tall, walk proud, walk the hell away from their prison, and don't look back unless it's to burn the damn blueprint. You are not responsible for their comfort. You are responsible for your freedom. Let them deal with their panic. Let them sit in the silence you used to fill with apologies. You're done explaining. You're done justifying. You're done carrying a family's sickness on your back like it was a badge of honor. You are not their scapegoat. You are not their fixer. You are the chosen one. And now you're walking proof that the cage was never real. Only your freedom is, and it's louder than their lies will ever be. Number 3. Why they're panicking. You were the thread holding their illusion together. They didn't just build a cage, they built a kingdom, and you were the pillar. The second you stepped out, the whole castle started to crumble. Let's rip the curtain all the way down. Their panic isn't confusion, it's collapse. They always knew this day might come. They just prayed it wouldn't. They laughed at your boundaries, scoffed at your growth, mocked your silence. Because deep down, they sensed it. The moment you stopped playing your role, their entire house of lies would shake at the foundation. Control wasn't just their habit, it was their identity. And you were the keystone, the peacekeeper, the emotional shock absorber, the family translator, the one who took the hits and smiled through it. You were trained to carry their chaos like it was a birthright. You were never just a member of the family. You were the scapegoat, the fixer, the emotional sponge. They threw their filth at you, then complained when you started looking stained. And now you're walking away, now you're waking up, now you're healing. That's not just rebellion to them, that's apocalypse. Because if you don't need them, it means you never did. And that reality is a threat they can't emotionally afford to admit. If you survive without their grip, it proves that all their cruelty was never love, never guidance, never protection. It was control, plain, calculated control. They didn't invest in you, they fed on you. And now they're starving. They used shame like a leash, guilt like a muzzle. They distorted the very air you breathed to make sure you saw yourself as the problem, so they could always be the solution. The moment you stopped calling them for help, the illusion cracked. The moment you smiled without their approval, they felt the power shift, and it terrified them. Why do you think they suddenly care now? Why do you think they start calling, checking in, pretending to be worried? It's not love. It's not guilt. It's fear. You were the asset that held their dysfunction in place. You ever pull one thread and watch a whole sweater unravel? That's what your freedom does to their system. It exposes everything they were hiding, because your healing makes their toxicity impossible to ignore. Your peace screams louder than all their manipulation. Your silence, once used to keep the peace, is now a signal flare to every lie they ever told. And don't fall for the guilt trip they'll try to run now. You've changed, they'll say. Family sticks together, they'll preach. But what they really mean is, come back and keep making our sickness feel normal. They don't want you happy. They want you obedient. They want you confused, compliant, manageable. Because a free, fully aware chosen one is the one thing they can't predict, can't control, and definitely can't silence. And here's the brutal part. Some of them weren't even aware they were doing it. They were raised in their own cages, learned the same manipulations, swallowed the same poison. But unconscious abuse is still abuse. Just because they didn't know they were breaking you doesn't mean they didn't do it. That's their responsibility, not your burden. So let them panic. Let them spiral. Let them watch from a distance as the person they once chained down now flies higher than they ever imagined. You don't owe them your silence just because they called it love. You don't owe them your presence just because they share your blood. Your happiness is rebellion. Your boundaries are revolution. Every smile, every deep breath, every night of peace you didn't used to have. That's the evidence, the receipts, the reality check they never saw coming. And don't doubt for a second that this is real, this awakening you're experiencing, the clarity, the weight that's finally lifting, the way your body feels different now that you're not surrounded by their energy. That's not coincidence. That's the system shifting in your favor. That's the universe affirming, yes, you were always chosen. Yes, they always feared your power. And yes, their panic is just the sound of your prison breaking for good. So stay the course, hold the line. Don't run back just because they finally realized what they lost. You are not responsible for saving what was built to break you. They didn't panic because they lost you. They panicked because without you, they're exposed. Because your freedom isn't just escape, it's the truth made visible. Let them tremble, let them watch. You're not coming back. You were never theirs to keep. Number 4, they called it love, but it was psychological warfare in disguise. When manipulation wears the mask of love, betrayal feels like loyalty and freedom feels like a crime. Let's stop sugarcoating this for even 1 second. Your family didn't need to chain you to a wall. They turned your own mind into a prison, and they did it with surgical precision. They didn't storm in with rage. They wrapped control in sweetness. They didn't push you into the cage. They made you walk in smiling, thinking it was safety. That's the darkest part of their tactics. They wore the mask of, I care about you, while silently making sure you never cared too much about yourself. Every sacrifice they paraded wasn't about giving. It was about leverage, emotional currency. They did just enough to say, look what I've done for you, but never enough to let you be free of them. And the moment you started pulling away, The victim act kicked in. "After all I've done for you," became their favorite chorus, because victimhood was their shield. They could abuse you in private, then collapse in tears the second you pushed back. And if you dared question their behavior, suddenly you were the heartless one. You were the betrayer. You were the villain in the story they wrote to keep you cast as the grateful, silent one. Every compliment they gave had a string attached. Every show of love had a hook hidden beneath it. You weren't being affirmed. You were being baited, fed just enough validation to keep you questioning whether things were really that bad. That's how they made you hesitate. That's how they made you doubt the fire rising in your chest, the voice in your gut that kept whispering, "This isn't right." They knew exactly what they were doing. Don't let the fake tears fool you. One of the most sinister tactics, making freedom look like betrayal. They wrapped the word family so tight around your throat that the idea of choosing yourself felt wrong. You weren't just trying to heal, you were fighting the psychological wiring that told you every step away was abandonment. They blurred love with obligation so well that you couldn't tell where their pain ended and your guilt began. They used traditions, holidays, and generational scripts as traps. "This is just how we do things. You know how your uncle is. We don't talk about those things." Translation: stay quiet, stay broken, and don't rock the boat. They made you question whether your discomfort was even valid, as if peace was only something you got to experience if it didn't make them uncomfortable. Let's talk about the silence games, the sudden cold shoulder, the backhanded compliments, the way they'd ignore your wins but obsess over your mistakes. These weren't harmless quirks. These were tactics, psychological operations dressed up as just how we are. It wasn't harmless. It was sabotage. They kept you walking on eggshells while making you believe you were the one with the problem. They weaponized your empathy, used your love like a leash, and every time you tried to pull away, they tightened it with memories, guilt trips, and threats wrapped in emotion. They played the long game, and the masterpiece of their manipulation, making you internalize it, so you'd gaslight yourself before anyone else even had to, so you'd stay in line without being told, so you'd punish yourself for even thinking of leaving. But here's the thing they never expected. You started to wake up, and once a chosen one wakes up, every mask starts to crack. You saw behind the curtain. You realized that most of their kindness was control. Most of their love was leverage. Most of their sacrifice was scoreboard keeping. And suddenly it all stopped feeling like home and started feeling like hell. They didn't prepare for that. They didn't plan for the moment you'd value your peace more than their approval. They didn't expect the day you'd walk out, not with rage, but with silence, because silence is the only thing they can't twist. It's the moment you stop defending yourself, stop explaining, stop trying to get them to understand what they already knew. They just didn't care. And don't let anyone romanticize this with, "but they tried their best." No, try again. You don't try your best by breaking someone and calling it tradition. You don't love someone by crippling their spirit just so you can keep them close. You try your best by unlearning the damage, not passing it down with a smile. Your healing isn't betrayal, it's self-rescue. Your boundaries aren't cruelty, they're protection. Your silence isn't disrespect, it's survival. So let them call it betrayal. Let them whisper. Let them twist the story to protect their pride. Because you're the one who broke the cycle. You're the one who didn't pass the poison forward. And that makes you dangerous in the best way possible. They used shady tactics because they knew they could never keep you otherwise. And now that you're out, don't just escape, expose, not by shouting, not by arguing, just by living free, loudly, peacefully, fully. Because nothing terrifies manipulators more than someone who no longer needs to be understood to walk away. You were never disloyal for leaving the cage. You were chosen to destroy it. And now, let them sit in the silence they created, while you breathe in the freedom they never wanted you to taste. Number 5. Breaking out was just the beginning. Now you're burning down the blueprint. They didn't just fear your escape, they feared your evolution, because a healed version of you is living proof that they were always the problem. Let's make one thing brutally clear. Escaping the cage was only step 1. Don't let that temporary high of physical distance fool you. Just because you walked away doesn't mean they stopped trying to control the story. In fact, now that you're out, their true panic begins. Not because you left, but because you're thriving without them. They were never just scared of losing access to you. They were scared of losing control of the narrative. And now that you're rewriting it in real time, they're doing everything they can to claw it back. You see, while you were in the cage, they got to shape the version of you that everyone saw. The weak one, the lost one, the crazy one. They spun your confusion into character flaws. They twisted your trauma responses into personality traits. You weren't growing wrong, you were growing in poisoned soil, but they told everyone you were the issue. That was their power. That was their safety net. But now you're out here glowing. Now you're healing. Now you're speaking truth they hoped would never leave the family walls. And your light? It's a spotlight on everything they tried to bury. They called you naive, but you're making moves they could never imagine. They said you'd fall apart, but you're standing taller than ever. They told people you were broken, but now you're the one people turn to for clarity. And that is why they double down. That's why the rumors start. That's why they act confused, play innocent, whisper lies behind closed doors. Because your growth is their exposure. Your peace is their panic. Your strength makes everything they said about you look like the desperate fiction it always was. Don't be surprised when the smear campaign kicks off. That's textbook behavior. When manipulators lose control of your mind, they try to take control of your image. If they can't keep you, they'll try to taint how the world sees you, whispering half-truths, painting you as unstable, questioning your motives, making your healing journey look like a midlife crisis or a spiritual breakdown. They can't handle the fact that you became the version of yourself they always said you were incapable of becoming. It shatters their illusion. It forces accountability into the room, and that's their kryptonite. They weren't counting on you rising. They weren't counting on you being louder in your truth than they ever were in their lies. And don't be fooled by the fake concern, the sudden check-ins, the awkward "how have you been" messages. That's not love, that's surveillance. They want intel, not intimacy. They want updates so they can recalibrate their strategy. Your success isn't just threatening, it's humiliating. Because now people are starting to ask questions. Now people are starting to notice the gaps. Now, people who once believed their version of you are seeing your truth unfold, and it doesn't match the script. This is why escaping isn't enough, because if you stop at the door and don't burn the script, they'll keep acting like they wrote your story. And worse, you might still feel like you owe them something, a call, an explanation, a reunion. But hear this. You owe no one your silence when it was purchased with your suffering. Your freedom isn't passive. It's not just the absence of chains. It's the presence of clarity, the confidence to speak, the right to take up space, the refusal to water yourself down so others feel more comfortable. So no, don't just escape. Rebuild. Build so boldly, so authentically, so unapologetically that your life becomes the loudest rebuttal they never saw coming. Let every move forward echo with the truth. You never needed their approval to thrive. You just needed to get out of their grip. Let your peace convict them. Let your glow haunt them. Let your silence scream what your words no longer need to say, because the cage was never just a place, it was a performance. And now the show is over. Curtains closed, truth exposed. You didn't just walk out, you walked back in as proof that they lost. And that is the part they'll never recover from. Number 6. You weren't the problem. You were the projection screen for their shame. They didn't scapegoat you because you were weak. They did it because you were strong enough to carry the weight of their denial without collapsing. Until now. Let's stop pretending this was ever accidental. You weren't the family disappointment by chance. You were assigned the scapegoat role, strategically, deliberately, and early. Not because you were the problem, but because you were the one they couldn't control without making you believe you were the issue. You were the emotional landfill. The chosen one they blamed for everything, so the rest of them could pretend they were fine. And the most sinister part, they made it look normal. When you cried, you were too sensitive. When you questioned, you were disrespectful. When you stood your ground, you were difficult. They framed your very existence as flawed. Why? Because if they could get you to internalize their dysfunction as your failure, you'd spend your whole life fixing yourself instead of exposing them. That's not just abuse, that's strategy. You became the family's emotional shock absorber, their shadow puppet, the one who got blamed when things went wrong, even if you weren't in the room. That wasn't coincidence, that was training, that was conditioning. They set it up so perfectly that even you started to believe it. This always happens because of me. If I could just be better, they'd stop. Maybe I really am the one who ruins everything. No, you were the mirror, not the mistake, and they hated the reflection. That's why they cracked it. That's why they threw their projections on you like dirty laundry and walked away feeling clean. It was never about who you were. It was about what you revealed. And every time your truth got too loud, they twisted the narrative to make you the villain. Understand this, scapegoating isn't random, it's mathematical. They picked the one with the light, the empathy, the insight. They picked the one who felt everything, because if you could feel it, they knew they could blame you for it. And if you ever resisted, they'd double down, punish you harder, freeze you out, paint you as crazy to anyone who'd listen. And guess what? Some people did believe them. Friends, other family members, even you at times. That's how deep the smear went. That's how tightly they wrapped the roll around your throat. But now you're waking up, and that's what terrifies them. Because once a scapegoat sees the system, they stop playing the part. They stop apologizing. They stop explaining. They stop accepting silent guilt just to keep the peace. And when that happens, the entire lie starts to unravel. Now you're asking real questions. Why was I always the one they talked about behind closed doors? Why did I always feel like I was wrong, no matter how hard I tried? Why did they love me conditionally when I performed, complied, or stayed silent? Because they never saw you as a whole person. They saw you as a role, a function, a sponge for their shame, a decoy for their dysfunction, and they fed off your confusion to keep their fragile image intact. And now that you're standing in truth, They can't take it. Your healing threatens their entire dynamic. Your growth doesn't just make them uncomfortable, it exposes them. They're not panicking because you were broken. They're panicking because you're not. Your peace is proof. Your distance is evidence, and your refusal to carry their mess any longer is the ultimate betrayal to the false order they built around you. Let's be clear, this was never about fairness. Scapegoating is about power. It's about control. It's about targeting the one they knew had the strength to survive the fire, just not the support to recognize it for what it was. Until now. Now you see the game. Now you see the guilt wasn't yours. Now you see their blame was just projection, fear dressed up as righteousness. And now you refuse to play their pawn. Let them scramble. Let them rewrite the story for anyone still willing to listen. Because the truth is, your silence was their comfort. Your pain was their shield. But the moment you said, "No more," everything shifted. You weren't chosen because you were weak. You were chosen because you were the only one strong enough to survive being labeled the problem without becoming it. You carried the weight of a broken system and still found the strength to walk away. That's not damage, that's power. You're not the scapegoat anymore. You're the whistleblower, the cycle breaker, the threat they never saw coming, and now they can't silence. Let them wear their shame. Let them carry their own weight. You were never meant to bleed for their healing, and now you won't, not ever again. Number 7. They didn't choose you out of love. They chose you to silence what they couldn't understand. You weren't their favorite. You were their fire alarm, and they tried to smash you before the whole house burned down. Let's kill the illusion right now. Being the chosen one in a toxic family is not a compliment. It's not a badge of honor. It's not love in disguise. It's a red target painted on your back because they saw something in you they couldn't tame. You were chosen, yes, but not for praise, not for protection. You were chosen for suppression, for containment, for the quiet annihilation of everything inside you that made their dysfunction uncomfortable. You were born with qualities they couldn't match, so they tried to dismantle them one by one. Your curiosity was labeled defiance. Why do you always question everything? Your independence? Selfishness? You think you're better than everyone? Your honesty? Too much. Too intense. Too emotional. Too serious. They couldn't keep up, so they called you broken. They couldn't understand, so they labeled you dangerous. But what they were really saying was this: you're the one who sees through us, and we don't know what to do with that. Your power wasn't loud, it was clear. That was the threat. You didn't need a title, a crown, or a role. You walked into rooms with eyes that knew, that read between the lines, that sensed the games. You questioned when you were told to obey. You noticed when no one else did. You felt when everyone else numbed out. And for people who survive off manipulation, gaslighting, and illusions, someone like you is hell on earth. You weren't chosen to be celebrated. You were chosen to be controlled. That's why they gave you just enough attention to keep you close, but never enough support to make you strong. That's why they studied you, not to nurture, but to find the best ways to break you. They used their familiarity like a weapon, hitting you in the soft spots, the places only family is supposed to protect. They wanted to hollow you out from the inside, turn your brilliance against you. They turned your empathy into a leash, your emotional depth into something to mock, your voice into a threat. And yet, somehow, you're still standing. And now you're stepping into everything they tried to smother, and that's why they're panicking. Because when the chosen one survives, heals, and remembers, they become the one thing a toxic family system cannot handle, a truth teller who doesn't need their approval to speak. You're no longer asking for validation. You're no longer explaining your pain. You're no longer shrinking to keep the peace. You've realized that your voice was always the earthquake, and now that you've stopped apologizing for the tremors, they're feeling the aftershocks. They can't handle who you're becoming because it makes one thing glaringly obvious. They failed. All their efforts to break you, twist you, mold you, they didn't work. The very traits they targeted are now your strength. The qualities they tried to crush are now your identity. Every insult became armor. Every betrayal became fuel. Every attempt to silence you made your voice stronger. You are not too much. You were just placed in a family that was committed to being less. And let's be honest, they knew this day was coming. That's why they fought so hard. That's why they pushed you, isolated you, turned others against you. Because they knew that if you ever stopped doubting yourself, you'd outgrow them, that your light would expose the mold growing in their cracks, that once you saw your reflection clearly, you'd stop begging for scraps from people who only fed you when it served them. They didn't pick you because you were easy to control. They picked you because you were the only one they couldn't fully conquer, and that terrified them. And now that you're rising, they're calling it ego, they're calling it disrespect, but it's none of that. It's truth, it's evolution, it's the full, unleashed version of you standing in the same room they tried to keep you small in and not asking for a damn thing. So no, you were never their favorite. You were the threat. The reminder, the mirror they couldn't smash without facing themselves. And now, you're untouchable, not because they stopped trying, but because you stopped shrinking. Let them talk, let them twist it, let them rewrite the story for people still asleep. You know what really happened, you know what you endured, and now you know what it means. Being the chosen one was never about favoritism. It was about being built to break the system from the inside. And you did. Now stand in it. They can't stop what they never understood. Number 8. Freedom isn't just an exit. It's a wilderness you learn to survive in. The silence after escape isn't peace. It's the echo of every chain you broke, and if you're hearing it, you're finally free enough to rebuild. Let's not sugarcoat what happens after the cage breaks. Everyone loves to talk about freedom like it's a celebration, like the moment you cut the cord, you suddenly find yourself dancing in the sunlight, healed and whole. But here's the part no one wants to talk about. Freedom is lonely as hell at first. Because when you walk away from toxic systems, you're not just walking away from the abusers, you're walking away from everyone they infected, everyone they lied to about you, everyone who benefited from your silence, everyone who knew something was wrong but stayed quiet to keep their seat at the table. You leave, and suddenly the phone goes quiet. The messages stop. The invites disappear, and you're standing in this unfamiliar silence, wondering, was this the right move? Yes, it was. But that doesn't mean it won't hurt. Because the shady ones never just let you go. They don't bless your healing. They don't wish you well. They rewrite the story in real time to save their image. They paint you as unstable, ungrateful, disrespectful. They start whisper campaigns behind your back, dripping poison into ears that never even cared to hear your side. They don't just smear you, they erase you, replacing your truth with their fiction. And what's worse, sometimes people believe them. Sometimes even the ones you thought might get it choose comfort over truth. And suddenly the room feels colder, the silence heavier. You start to wonder, was I the crazy one? Did I overreact? Maybe it wasn't that bad. Stop. That's the trap. That's the loneliness they counted on. They knew once you were isolated, you'd be more likely to return, that the silence might feel more unbearable than the noise you escaped from, that you'd miss the chaos just because it was familiar. This is where most people get pulled back in, not because they want to, but because they can't handle what comes after the freedom. But here's the truth you need to hold on to. This part is sacred. The isolation isn't punishment, it's purification. It's where the real rebuilding begins. It's where the false identities they stitched onto your skin begin to fall off. It's where you start asking, who am I without their narrative? Who am I without their voices in my head? This is where you stop performing, stop over-explaining, stop apologizing for taking up space. You begin to meet you, not the scapegoat, not the fixer, not the peacekeeper, just you, raw, unfiltered, untouched by manipulation. And yes, it's lonely, but it's also real. No more forced smiles, no more walking on eggshells, just silence, clarity, and room to breathe. And here's the beautiful, brutal truth. From that empty space, you will rebuild. The loneliness won't last forever. But don't rush to fill it with noise. Let it do its work. Let it strip away everything that wasn't real. Because as you sit in that stillness, something begins to happen. You begin to attract people who see you, not the version of you that played nice to survive, but the version that's true. The world starts to respond differently when you stop shrinking. When your energy shifts from please like me to I'm not here to perform, people feel it. The wrong ones flee. The right ones find you. You start to build a new circle, slowly, quietly, authentically, not out of desperation, but out of alignment. And no, it won't happen overnight. Some days it'll feel like no one understands, but the ones who do, when they arrive real. No masks, no games, just connection that isn't built on your silence, but on your truth. And one day you'll look around and realize you didn't just escape a cage, you built a new world, a life not dictated by obligation or fear. A space where love isn't conditional, where you're not tiptoeing around triggers, but standing solid in your own presence. That's what true freedom is. Not just leaving the room, but no longer needing to be in it. Not just escaping their system, but creating one that honors you. So if you're sitting in the quiet right now, wondering why it hurts so much, hold on. That pain is the detox. That ache is the residue of everything you carried for people who never deserved your weight. You're not alone. You're early in your freedom. And this isn't the end. It's the beginning of a life where you get to be fully you, without apology. Let the silence do its job. Let the loneliness teach you who's worth your energy, and let your healing be so complete that even the ones who tried to break you no longer recognize the person you've become. Because the truth is, you were never meant to belong in their world. You were meant to build your own. And now that you see the truth for what it is, no filters, no illusions, there's no going back. You didn't just survive the cage, you exposed it. You've stepped into the role they feared most, the awakened, unstoppable version of yourself. The one who no longer asks for permission to breathe. If this message hit home, like this video, subscribe to help push it to more chosen ones. Drop the number 77 in the comments if you're ready to own your freedom, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Let's light the path for the next to rise.